Hello everyone. Okay, so I'm going to go over a demo on how to decorate your cake for your two-tiered cake that's coming up. So your second cake project. Okay, so I'm just showing you on a one-tiered cake right now, just some things that you can do to decorate your base. And then what you would do to decorate the base of your top tier, and also going over a technique called brush embroidery. You can also find different videos on brush embroidery on the internet besides this one. So that's an idea. In your packet you did get something like this where there's a lot of different types of illustrations and things like that where you could practice piping with Royal Icing. So you will need Royal Icing for this project. When you do your piping on your cake for your base, if you want to, I want you to use Royal Icing rather than buttercream. Buttercream will leave oil marks, and not only that, but it doesn't harden up like fondant does. You want to use something that is very close to the fondant material, which is Royal Icing. All right, so I'm going to go over what I did to create the stencil for my brush embroidery. So I used this illustration here, and what I did is I traced it with just a piece of parchment, just a round parchment that you have. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to trace it on the other side. Right now it's just traced on one side. I'm going to trace it on the other side, so that way when I do place it on the cake and I just lightly trace it, that carbon will be on your cake. Now it's not going to have lead in it. It's carbon, so it's not poisonous in any way. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm just going to I'm going to go over my illustration. Okay, so I just traced the other side, so both sides have this illustration on it. Now, one thing I do want to give you a heads up on is right now the cake is very sticky. That's because the cake has actually been in the freezer for a couple of days. Actually, it's been probably for a week, and I just covered it with fondant. So what's going to happen is, because it is in a room temp environment, it's going to sweat. It's going to be kind of like when you throw a bunch of ice cubes in your glass full of water or something, and then you have it in the sun or room temp, it's going to sweat. So this is basically doing the same thing. So don't be alarmed if this happens. This is quite normal. If it's really bothering you, what you can do is put it in front of a fan for an hour or so, and that will help. So this is just the way this works. Even a buttercream cake being in the freezer without any fondant would start to sweat as well. So it's just, getting that up to room temp. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start this at the bottom here, and I want to take this to the top, and I'm just going to press against the cake. Now, because it is sticky, that's actually working in my favor at this point. If it didn't want to stick, then what you can do is you can put a little Crisco on parts of your parchment, and that will act as kind of like a glue. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to trace this on the cake really quick. And I'm making sure when I trace that I'm not leaning my hand against the cake, because you will start to see handprints. So really try to just to be aware of that, because sometimes we do it, we don't even realize we're doing it, and then we pull off our parchment and then we have this big handprint on it, and then it's really hard to get that handprint out. So that's just one thing to be aware of. So I need a little bit of height here. I'm just going to do this really quick. And I'm just tracing my illustration here. Okay, so what happened was it didn't pop up as I thought it would with the lining, but I do have an outline, a clear outline of where to pipe. Okay, so we're just gonna go with that. Make sure that you have a pencil that really shows through very well. I think my pencil just wasn't thick enough. So so I can see here, I'm looking at my my flower here, and I'm gonna start piping. Now what I'm doing is I have my Royal Icing here, and I have a number 4 tip. Okay, and what you want is a thick tip to brush embroider, because you want a thick bead. And what I also have here is a little bit of egg white and a small little brush. Okay. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to and you don't, as you can see, I don't have a straight line here. I actually want it to be a little bit, I don't want it to be perfect. I don't want it to be a straight line, because when you say embroidery, it's meant to look like lace, okay, or stitching. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a portion, and I'm just going to pull part of that Royal Icing inward. I'm only pulling one part of it and I'm leaving the rest. And one thing you want to do is you don't want to pipe the whole thing and then come back to it. You want to be able to pipe small parts at a time. And the reason being is that by the time you get to the first part that you had piped, it could very well be dry. So you really don't want that to dry before you get to it. So let's try another part. And then I could actually use a little bit more coming out of my tip as well. Okay. And then I'm gonna just do a leaf. So there's my leaf. And I'm just gonna take, and I don't wanna overload my brush either with the egg white either, because I don't want it overly saturated. I don't wanna get it too wet where it's not pulling in anything. So as you can see, it's kind of all melding together, and it's because it's a little too wet. So so I just want to leave that be for right now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change out my tip for number 2. Now, if you want to do some delicate piping, because there is parts that just don't need to be brushed. So what I'm going to do is just do some very delicate piping, and I have a number 2 here. And I'm just going to go over a little bit here to make it kind of look very lacy like. Now, I also, when you're making your royal icing, you want to have a medium to stiff peak. And that means that when you take your spatula, you pull it up, you want that peak to stay. Now, a medium is more where it kind of falls over a little bit. A stiff is where it just stands straight up. And I would say that my royal icing is a little bit on the runny side, and so it could be a little bit more thick. Okay, so so that's brush embroidery. Okay, so, and you don't have to do brush embroidery. This is just an idea. You can do a lot more, and we're going to cover that. So with a your border, you can use a straight tip like I was using for the brush embroidery, a number 4, and you can just add some like little pearls at the bottom. Okay, so all right, so you can do that, but you can also change out your tip for a star tip and make shells as well. So let's go over that as well. I'm using a number 16, which is a fairly small star tip. And if you don't have a 16, that's fine too. You can use another size. So I'm just gonna use, makes for a very delicate, pretty look at the bottom. And remember that the thicker your royal icing is, the more dimension and detail that you will get in your piping. If it's really loose, like say you do a shell just like this and it's super loose, it's just gonna blend in together, almost kind of like it'll just melt in together. So the thicker it is, the more dimension that you will get, and more detail, and it'll actually stay within itself. It's not going to blend in together. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so for another way that you can decorate. So now I have these molds. These are Wilton molds, and you can get these at Hobby Lobby, Michael's. I believe they still have them at Joann's, but I'm not too sure. Definitely at Hobby Lobby or Michael's. And this is has jewels on it, so it has beads on the bottom. It has like a 3-tiered bead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some gum paste, and I have white gum paste and I have a lighter pink. It's pretty much almost the same color. And I'm just going to take a little bit of cornstarch, make sure that I don't get any stickiness in here, and do some designs. So I'm going to use this right here. I think that's really nice. And I want to make sure that I get enough. I have a small little ball in there. I don't want too much excess popping out. And if you have a little paring knife, you can actually cut away some excess. Okay, so here we have this shape here, and I'm just gonna pop it out. If it's not wanting to pop out or it's not holding its shape, just let it sit there for a bit. This one's not really holding its shape. Let it sit in your mold. So I'm going to try another one. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to use some white. I'm going to do another mold that I can also show you a great idea. And I'm going to use this large pearl here. And I'm just going to make a long, kind of like a long snake type of thing, just to pop it in there, and then just start pressing in. Make sure that it spreads out into those little crevices. Okay. So the reason why I'm using I'm using gum paste rather than regular fondant is because regular fondant can be very, very squishy, and you're gonna have to let it sit in your molds for a really long time to set up. Gum paste is just going to be a lot easier to work with. And it's going to dry faster. And it's proving to be very stubborn to get out of this thing here. Okay, here we go. Okay. I definitely suggest you dust some cornstarch into your molds before you start working on it. Okay, so you can use that stickiness to stick your border. That can work in your favor. So if not, then you can take a little bit of water. I have my little water brush here, and just apply water to your base. Okay, or you can take a little bit of Royal Icing, but if you do that, you want to make sure that it's very small amount. Okay, so I'm just gonna apply this bead here to the base. Okay, and I'm noticing it's not wanting to stick in some parts. Well, if that happens, just apply some water and that will act as your glue. And here it's not really wanting to stick, so I'm gonna add some water. Okay, so you have a great little border there. It's nice and clean. Okay. And then with these little pieces here, and they're not proving to be very cooperative, that's for sure. So this held its shape. You can always like add something to it. Or use this as your border instead of like bead or something like that. So, okay. So that is another idea, that you can use some of these at the bottom, or you can actually use one of these squares. If you happen to get this type of mold, I don't know how available this mold is at the stores. I think they're forever changing, so I'm not too sure about that, but you could use one of those, or whatever you think would be make a good border. Okay, and then I'm gonna put a little bit more in the square one here. So really, I mean, you can create a border really out of anything. You don't really necessarily need to pipe it. That's the biggest point there, is that you can use all kinds of things. So I'm just gonna leave that in there. And then we're gonna go to another idea of using a border, but having the border kind of follow up the cake. Okay, so in your kit, you do have petal cutters, you have hydrangea cutters, and then you have your leaf cutters. Okay, so I'm gonna roll my white out here. And I'm gonna roll it out pretty thin. Okay. So I have it really pretty thin. It's almost like fabric. All right. So then I'm gonna cut out some petals. And some larger petals. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to make individual rose petals, and I'm just thinning them out on the edges. All right, and then I'm going to press them in the veiner, in the petal veiner. Okay, so then what you can do is you can just let them rest for a little bit, but once they're dry, I'm going to put them against the surface of the cake, and I'm just using a little bit of water to get them to stick. Okay, so and you can have this kind of layered all the way around the cake if you wanted to. So then I'm going to pull that and then add maybe another one there. Okay, And then I'm going to take my hydrangea cutter Okay, so I'm just gonna make 3 right now. And I'm going to just thin those out a bit. I'm not too worried about the center. And then I'm just going to put these in my veiner. And then you can take the bottom of a pointy paintbrush, or I think you have a kind of like a stick in your kit. I'm just going to take these hydrangea and just press down in the center. And if you let them dry just a little bit, they're a bit floppy. But if you let them dry in their cups, they'll really stand up. So like, these are standing up just not too bad, but they'll stand up a lot better. So I'm just doing basically kind of like a flowery layered effect that you can do with your cutters as kind of like a decorative border. Okay, so it kind of gives it dimension and texture. And I'm just using white because it pops against the pink, but you can use, you know, a different color pink or something like that. Okay, let's get back to this mold here. And I just did 2 square jewels. And I'm gonna just peel those out. Okay, not too bad, but they could definitely use more cornstarch in there. So as an example, you can always do a border using something like this. Okay, so there's definitely different ways of using or making a border on your cake. Okay, so there's also, if you would like to add a small little ruffle. Okay, so I have my pink here, and this little tool here is a cutter tool, and you have that in your kit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll out fairly thin, because I'm going to start out with a ribbon. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a ruler and I'm going to cut a ribbon out. Now I'm going to just take my ruler, and you can find one of these at Michael's, any of the craft stores. Having a ruler and working with cakes is really, really helpful. So then I'm just going to just eyeball it here. I'm actually using my mat here, which is very helpful. And I'm just going to take and roll a piece out, or actually cut a piece. And then I'm basically doing an inch. I'm going to set that aside, and then I'm going to roll out a little bit more. What I want to do is I want to take my ball tool, and I'm going to just go back and forth, half on, half off my gum paste, and I'm putting a lot of pressure. Okay, I'm stretching out that gum paste, almost like stretching out a rubber band. That is never going to snap back into place. So I've got this nice ruffle here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some water. And I want to put 2 ribbons on there, but I'm going to leave some space. I want to put this up above. Okay. I'm just going to yank that off so I don't have an X-Acto knife on hand. so I just want to make sure that that ribbon is keeping its shape. And now I'm going to do the same thing. And remember, the harder you press, the more it's gonna ruffle. Okay, so I want to see, I'm going to cut this off at a certain length. And then I'm going to just take this with this and then place it right underneath that first ruffle. And then what you can do at the very bottom is just make a smaller strip. And then maybe do half the size. So I was doing an inch, so maybe I'll do half an inch. So now I have my strip. And then what I'm going to do is just really get that to ruffle. And that's going to be at the very bottom. And then just gently place that. Okay, so here I have 3 layers, and you can take it up a little higher if you want to. It all just depends on what you want or how you want it to look. Okay, so, and then you can just take one of your tools, just make sure that those ruffles are kind of really hanging out. And so just remember to add pressure to those ruffles, and you don't want to have your strips too thick because it's going to be harder to get those to really ruffle out, so, or to stretch out. Okay, so this is pretty much the end of our demo. I will be doing another demo on covering the 2 cakes for our second cake project. So a 6-inch and an 8-inch. This is an 8-inch. And then from there, I'll be doing another video on stacking your cakes, how to dowel and stack, and then how to arrange your flowers. All right, so thanks for watching. Stay tuned. Oh man.